Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh, and we thank you so much for joining us here today. On the show, Biden's first big news conference. He assailed Republicans over voting rights and defended his record on the border. He also did say he expected to run in 2024. We'll go through some of the biggest highlights from the big man's first big day, finally stepping out from behind the West Wing and on to the microphones. Was he all tranked up like past performances, or did he kind of, have it early enough in the day so he was able to get through it? We will give you all the details. Also, in Georgia, a vicious attack on voting rights as the Georgia governor signs the GOP voter suppression bill into law. And this is underlining the importance of federal voting rights. H.R. 1, why it's so important. Also, the Pentagon made a big and hilarious mistake in Iraq and Iran. And also, Amazon is literally having a complete meltdown over its upcoming unionization drive and increasing public pressure and scrutiny that it is bringing. That is a very, very interesting story as a whole. That's going to be coming out March 29th, these election results, but Amazon's meltdown on Twitter. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Newsflash, episode 499, panel this weekend for the 500th. Welcome in. Welcome in. All right, so on the show today, we have Biden at his first press conference. He said on Thursday that Republican efforts to limit voting rights were sick and un-American, vowing to prevent states from taking what he called despicable actions to undermine democracy by making it hard for people to cast ballots. And this is obviously, of course, the trend that we've seen American politics going for so long. Really, ever since the 1965 Voting Rights Act, people have just been chipping away at it over and over again. It looks like they're really finally starting to get to the core of it. Like these Republican vultures who are picking away at the last time at the infrastructure of our democracy, which is like our real infrastructure, which is getting incredibly old, and really needs some upgrading. And will the incredibly old man upgrade our incredibly old infrastructure, both in democracy and possibly even in real life infrastructure? We don't know, but he did speak to reporters today in the East Room of the White House for his first formal news conference, and he did say he would do everything in his power to pass voting rights legislation now under consideration in the Senate. But when asked about ending the Senate rule that requires 60 votes to approve most legislation, one of the biggest obstacles to voting rights, really, in pretty much his entire agenda, the president was much more cautious, suggesting that he was not open to committing to it. So in the 60 vote threshold imposed by the filibuster was being abused in a gigantic way, Biden said, reiterating his support for a proposal that would require senators to keep talking in order to block legislation and shift in practice that could deter the use of the rule. So they're going to still use it for some things. This is going to have to force them to work with the minority, which is, I believe it's something the Democrats want to do. They want to have some force other than their own that can come out and say, yeah, we couldn't do this because the Republicans stepped in front of this. They were going to, they're going to filibuster it, and we just couldn't be able to do this. Or they do filibuster and it kills the bill, and then you can blame the Republicans and fundraise off that. Like, that is what the game is. It's really, if you come down to it, the whole idea is doing just enough so that you can kind of still fundraise and pay consultants to talk about, like, how, the Republicans stopped us from doing more. Like, never, ever, ever go all the way. And always, try and blame it on the Republicans and always try and keep the status quo. Like, that is the DNC operating playbook. That is how the Democratic Party works. So why would Joe Biden, especially someone who's a Senate, traditionalist institution, whatever you want to call it, to his core, is not going to be doing that yet. But he is moving in the right direction in terms of just hardening his take on the filibuster, which many other times was worse. Like there's times where he's come out and said some pretty insane things that really raised a lot of eyebrows. He also signaled more directly that than he previously has, that he might eventually come back to the far-reaching proposals to limit or abolish the filibuster if doing so turned out to be essential for passage of a voting rights measure, which he actually does seem to really care about. Again, here reporting by Michael D. Shear and Zolong Kano Youngs in the New York Times. yeah, he really does seem to care something about voting rights legislation here, which it's really kind of interesting to see how he made that a priority. He pretty much did say that he would get rid of that if the Senate 50-50 and things really aren't working. If there's a complete lockdown and chaos as a consequence of the filibuster, then we'll have to go beyond what I'm talking about. And I think he's right on that. I think it's very fair to say. But the question is, where is he going to draw that line? If it's Barack Obama, if you're going to be like Barack Obama, you're going to draw it way, way too late and suffer massive political consequences from it. And Joe, I mean, something's clicking at least in the reports where he's like, I'm saying that I kind of want to show up Obama and pass some big legislation here. Like, that seems to be almost what he's saying. Like, that seemed to be the strategy he's trying to take. That was reported in Axios and was kind of being passed around to someone like, oh, Joe wants to go show up Obama. Let's egg him on here. And he seems a little, like, it seems like it's getting closer. But, again, we'll have to look in practice, to see how that really is. But I think it's very fair to say things are going in the right direction here. During a question and answer session that lasted more than an hour, Biden said that it was his expectation that he would run for re-election with Vice President Kamala Harris as his running mate, which I think pretty much means nothing. He said for the first time he can't picture American troops still in Afghanistan beyond the end of the year. They repeated it would be hard to have them out by the current deadline of May 1st. Again, this is going to be another thing to very much watch because it's very, very popular to kind of like rhetoricalize and, wax poetic about how we need to bring our boys home. If you're someone like Joe Biden, who's probably one of the biggest political forces that helped get them there in the first place and keep them there and build the conditions to send them there. So it is so, so, so hard to take that kind of coming from him until all the troops are back home and it's official that, like, we know. So that is for sure. He was also sure to promote his administration's progress in fighting the health and economic crises caused by the coronavirus pandemic, vowing to deliver 200 million vaccinations by the end of April, twice his previous pledge, even as the government also delivers a big new infusion of financial aid. As of yesterday, more than 100 million payments of $1,400 have gone to people's bank accounts, the president said, referring to the American Rescue Plan, and they pushed through Congress with no Republican support. And that's something that, it's a good thing that he did that, because the Republicans, if they don't support something, then they just, they don't support it, like that's how it works. That is just the way it is. And that, like it's the frame of mind that it's a bad bill if it doesn't get bipartisan support is held literally one place, and that's Washington, D.C., especially when it comes to things like massive relief for people in huge economic and health crises. But as he said, the pandemic remained the country's most urgent problem. He promised hope is on the way. He was also barraged with questions about his handling of the surge of migrants, especially children, at the U.S. border with Mexico. He insisted, sometimes emotionally, that his officials in his government were doing everything they could to treat migrant children humanely, but he repeatedly blamed former President Donald Trump for overcrowding the border facilities. The idea that I'm going to say, which I never would do, if an unaccompanied child ends up at the border, we're going to let him starve to death and stay on the other side. No previous administration did that except for Trump. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And right now, it seems like he... From what I can say is, and this is kind of a very, very important, very complicated and very separate issue. If we're just going to do a story here about all the different things in this press conference, if we do a whole, 20, 30 minutes on immigration in it of itself, going through some of that stuff. But what you really kind of have to take through here is look at some of the policies here. What Trump was doing was he was putting, especially during the coronavirus pandemic, he would take all these asylum seekers who have a right to stay in the U.S. and would send them back to these dangerous situations who come here. And he was admitting that. He was saying, I think, at the press conference quite strongly that, yes, these people are coming from bad places and we understand that. We acknowledge that. We want to, he says we want to treat them well. And of course, they say, of course, they're working on that. And that is something that they really need to fix because but really, what in practice, what he's doing is exactly what Trump's doing, is sending them back to these places. And, I mean, they have a certain amount of time, the time constraint here is fair. But what is, I think, very, very important is that we actually, do something about it. And we actually hold the government accountable, because this was their big thing. This was the big thing that they wanted to put out, and really show for everybody, was that they were better than Trump on immigration and all that stuff. They were taking the moral high ground. They pushed that so hard through the campaign, so hard. But if that is not clear, then that's a big problem. He said he was negotiating with Mexican officials to ensure that all families could be stopped, saying that they should all be going back. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't really know what he means there. Biden said his administration would intensify efforts to move migrant children out of crowded conditions at the border. That's what we want to do. We don't want to send them back to the country. Which is literally what Biden said, like 2 paragraphs up in the story. The idea that I'm going to say, which I would never do, if an unaccompanied child ends up at the border, we're going to let him starve to death and stay on the other side. No previous administration did that except under Trump. I'm not going to do that either, he says. So, and then he's saying they should all be going back. Is he talking about Mexico? I mean, he's negotiating with a Mexican official. This makes no sense. Biden said his administration would intensify efforts, again, to move migrant children out of crowded conditions at the border. He added that he had directed his top immigration officials this week to accelerate the pace at which migrant children are placed with relatives already living in the United States. They'll get a whole lot. They'll get a whole hell of a lot better. Real quick, or we're going to hear of some people leaving. We can get this done. We're going to get it done. The news conference was Biden's first extended grilling by journalists since taking office more than 2 months ago. Since then, his advisors have carefully controlled his interviews with the news media, which have included one-on-one interviews and some limited opportunities for reporters to ask questions during brief appearances. A veteran politician with a long history of verbal gaps during unscripted moments, Biden has entered the presidency with a more than usual amount of discipline about his message. He's coming in popular. Wins are gathering against all this year for an economic growth period, and he's got a huge stimulus bill into place that's sure to do a lot of good economically. It makes no sense for him to be out politically and talking. For our entertainment, I think, and probably for the good of the country. We got to see good old Uncle Joe, but that's my opinion. Anyway, not really too many fireworks from what I see, other than those in the Biden presser. On the other side of this, we'll talk about voting rights. So fun. SWRN has so much going on to tell you about. We, of course, have to start with Newsflash. We continue to make the grind to our 500th episode. That'll be on Sunday the 28th with a big panel special, bringing back some of your favorite Newsflash contributors. Until then, we'll be on the air, as always, every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday with that show. We started up our supplementary programming with a special all-new redesigned edition of Uncultured, designed to highlight some of the most interesting parts of hip-hop, whether it be past or present. And, of course, we are working on that brand new season of Hidden History, continuing telling the stories we told in Season 1. Spencer Walsh Radio Network. Listen today on Spreaker.com/TSWS. And we are very, very excited about that panel coming together. So far, it looks like we could have pretty much some of the normal panelists that we have on the show from various groups. So we are looking forward to that. Let's go to this In Common Dreams. A pretty vicious attack on voting rights. The Georgia governor signs the GOP voter suppression bill, bolstering the case for federal legislation to safeguard the franchise from Republicans' ongoing voter suppression efforts across the country. From the GOP, Governor Brian Kemp, on Thursday, signed into law a sweeping and unpopular bill overhauling the state's elections that critics have called a vicious attack on voting rights. Kemp's move came after really less than 2 hours after the Georgia Republican lawmakers gave final approval to Senate Bill 202, which had been criticized by voting rights advocates within and beyond the reach of the Peach State. President Joe Biden said Thursday that the GOP attempts to restrict voting are sick and un-American. He said that at the press conference. After Kemp signed the bill, he claimed at the news conference that the measure was another step towards ensuring our elections are secure, accessible, and fair. Again, the real joke part of that, obviously, is accessible, right? Because the whole point is to make them not accessible to certain people. After Kemp signed the bill, he claimed you get that, and by contrast, rights advocates lambasted the governor and state lawmakers for rapidly enacting this extraordinary dangerous legislation. Ari Berman, I don't know who he is, but he tweeted out about this. Breaking, Brian Kemp signs 95-page GOP voter suppression bill allowing GOP takeover of state county election boards, unlimited challenges to voter eligibility, so they could just go striking voters from the rolls for all these just ridiculous reasons, just doing that whenever they see fit, and having a real, GOP takeover of these election boards, and restricting drop boxes and making it a crime to give voters food and water in line. And it's definitely going to be challenged in court. So after the GOP failed to overturn the last election, Georgia Republicans are going all out to steal the next one, passing a sweeping power grab, including taking over state election board and county election boards so they can challenge the election results. Very, very dangerous. If Republicans thought this was the right thing to do, they wouldn't have done it this way, says Anna Dennis, the executive director of Common Cause Georgia. If they thought SB 202 was good public policy, they wouldn't have ran it through the General Assembly in only 6 hours. If they thought SB 202 was in the public interest, they would have made sure the public had a chance to learn about it. Instead, both the House and Senate leadership forced omnibus anti-voter bill through to the governor's desk in just hours on completely party-line votes. She continued, warning the legislation would amplify partisan interests and cement partisan control over our elections infrastructure. So Kemp is up for re-election next year and will be a pretty big beneficiary, just like he was in 2018, in a big way against Stacey Abrams, and a race that probably should have gone blue had there been, not literally the Secretary of State overseeing his own election. Just really an incredibly depressing turn of events there. All right, so let's move on to the Pentagon with a very interesting story from the American Prospect by Zach Kaplan. He writes, Iraq's Balad Air Base, home of the country's F-16 program, was running out of fuel at the worst possible time. It was the spring of 2017. The Iraqi military was preparing a final push to remove the Islamic State from Mosul, a major metropolis in the north of the country that had fallen to the extremists just 3 years earlier. But fuel trucks sent from Baghdad to the American military contractor that operated the base, Sallyport Global Services, were being ambushed. Without fuel, the Balad's fighter jets would not be able to provide air support to Iraqi soldiers battling the terrorist group. So, today, for the coalition fighting ISIS, the fuel squeeze was a self-inflicted crisis. Today, American influence in Iraq is felt largely through powerful defense contractors like Sallyport that act as unacknowledged boots on the ground. These companies have a vested interest in the continuation of the war. You wonder why Iraq and Afghanistan are kind of still going on under our breath. We just got to keep some troops in there. Yes, just so these people can kind of hang out and make money. Just to keep that whole cycle going until there's a next big enemy for everyone to get all freaked out about. So Sallyport's leadership contains a roster of former military and intelligence brass and has won around $2 billion in Pentagon awarded contracts at the Iraqi Air Base since 2014. So it's raking it up. American military contracts are ostensibly meant to bring peace and democracy to Iraq and security for the United States. In reality, Pentagon spending has only led to more violence. This fuel crisis at Balad was a perfect example. Sallyport's profits contingent on maintaining control of the base and ensuring its smooth functioning. This has driven the company to make deals with Iraqi politicians known for corruption. Sallyport's partners are even allegedly connected to paramilitary groups that include America's battlefield enemies and human rights violators. These types of illicit deals are a routine part of the Pentagon contracts across the country, and they're valuable enough to fight over. And all of our business partners in Iraq have been fully vetted, including vetted by the U.S. Department of Defense for work at Balad. C.D. Moore, Chief Operating Officer of Sallyport Global Holdings, said in a statement, "We are very vigilant about it and take very seriously our obligations with all U.S. and host nation laws and regulations." So, yeah, that's a little disclaimer there from C.D. Moore. Internally, Sallyport blamed ISIS for the attacks on its trucks, but the ambushes, which targeted the tankers attached to the fuel trucks rather than the drivers, didn't match the terrorist group's profile or its capabilities. Intelligence analysts privately believe they were part of a corporate turf war. The biggest hurdles you have in getting fuel are primarily political, said Sallyport consultant Ginger Cruz in a May 2017 email to the company. Cruz, a former U.S. government anti-corruption official, That's so good. That is so good. Oh my God. She was an anti-corruption official of the government. And now she's working for a defense contractor, like, turning Iraq into like ganglands, but for massive defense contractor companies. Like, this is insane. It's great. Love this country. In Iraq, good business typically means breaking the rules, something Sally Port was ready to do. On Cruz's recommendation, the contractor turned to an Iraqi company, Laith al-Bawadi, to supply fuel. Laith al-Bawadi shares personnel with a complex network of multinational companies called Sigma, and was previously blacklisted by the Cruz's former employer, the U.S. government, the Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction, is the official title, for alleged corruption. Laith al-Bawadi only delivered one shipment of fuel, according to Cruz, but working with Sigma solved Sally Port's short-term fuel issues. By 2018, two other Sigma-aligned companies called Aliyah and Al-Jabal were selling roughly 2.5 million liters of fuel at inflated rates to the American contractor every month. Aliyah, according to the conglomerate's website, was a Sigma subsidiary. Al-Jabal shared bank accounts with the conglomerate. Invoices show that the two companies charging prices more than 30 cents per liter above the standard prices set for contracts by Iraq's Oil Products Distribution Company, a branch of the country's Ministry of Oil. The planes stayed in the air and ISIS was expelled from Mosul, but Sally Port had been told the deal was dirty. We have committed to Laith al-Bawadi for a whole host of other reasons, including their ability to get all the proper authorizations from the Prime Minister. Wink, wink, Cruz wrote to the contractor's staff, some of whom appeared to have balked at the partnership. There are larger forces at work here. Come on, guys, stay focused on the game. Iraqi conglomerate Sigma's high-level connections were what appealed to Sally Port. The contractor hired it in part because, according to Cruz, it had direct support from Iraq's then Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi. The relevant subsidiary, Aliyah, was recommended for business since it was aligned with al-Abadi and his political party, according to a vetting memo produced by Sally Port by Cruz's consultancy, Mantid International, in October 2017. So these people were getting paid and also then turning around and funneling money towards, some of the worst people out there. Really just people who are literally causing problems, including like enemies of the battlefield, human rights violators, people who cause problems for the U.S. are, again, being directly funded by U.S.-backed actions. Because these defense contractors are there in Iraq for the same purpose that, this is really just a whole system, a whole way for a bunch of people to make money in a bunch of different circumstances, like a bunch of different ways, go back and forth, and all of a sudden, everyone's making money. And a lot of these people, they literally go from the government to defense. They go Iraq to Washington, and go from one theater to another, all finding ways they can give their friends money, so when they switch jobs again, they can cash in again. Like, that is how it works. And it's also how it works in a lot of different parts of politics, but it's really, I think, particularly egregious in the defense industry when you're playing with, human lives and, killing people and organized murder. So that is particularly just gross thing here. So Cruz argues that politically connected Iraqi businesses aren't too different from American lobbyists. Companies have a good, and she's probably right about that. Companies can have a good standing with political parties, just as companies in the United States have good standing with various U.S. administrations. She wrote in response to questions from the Prospect, "Let's be real. It's legal, and it's the way the business world works. Still, this web of connections required to transfer something as essential as fuel in Iraq raises red flags. There are realities on the ground that make Iraq an incredibly challenging place to do business. But from a compliance and anti-corruption perspective, this deal is alarming," says Jessica Tillitman, an assistant dean of the government procurement law program at George Washington University. Worse is the fact that even this deal didn't fully end the attacks. Other Iraqi factions still required payoff. Less than a month after the contractor hired Sigma, in spite of Prime Minister al-Abadi's efforts to clear the roads, Al-Jabal's trucks had already been hit twice. Again, it was unclear exactly who was responsible for these new attacks, but Iraqi politics drove Sally Port to partner with other dirty companies, some far nastier than Sigma. For years, the Pentagon had faced a simmering insurgency in Iraq's largely Shia north. In the wake of ISIS invasion in 2014, these insurgents largely coalesced into a group of Iranian-backed death squads known as the Hashad al-Shabi, pretty much meaning popular mobilization units. Self-styled freedom fighters, evidence of sectarian killings, documented by organizations like Human Rights Watch, revealed the paramilitary group's members are often war criminals and tools of repression. Since October 2019, Hasht groups have participated in the kidnapping, torture, and killings of hundreds of peaceful Iraqi protesters who are objecting to foreign influence in the country's corrupt political system. For 3 years until ISIS' defeat in Mosul, the Hasht and American military loosely coordinated operations against the terrorist groups, but sharing an enemy didn't make them allies. Hasht fighters have launched rockets at Americans on Iraqi bases, including in Balad. In return, the United States assassinated a major Hasht commander, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, in the drone strike that targeted Qasem Soleimani in January 2020. Last month, the Biden administration struck a Hasht-affiliated fighter in Syria. Despite open hostilities at the Balad air base, sources outlined a secret relationship far deeper than either side would care to admit. To be clear, militia membership in Iraq can be nebulous. This whole story is very nebulous, with varying levels of affiliations throughout personal and tribal connections. But American contractors are essentially cooperating with known enemies. Like literally, like this is pretty much how it works. Like the whole story is, you can read this again on prospect.com. But the whole story is here. This is a money pit. This is just so the American government can throw money at an issue that they know is not going to get any better, but it's going to get all their friends rich, and all the people who make the laws and press the buttons are going to get extraordinarily rich from it, and the system is going to keep on going. This is why the military-industrial complex, no one talks about it, one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful faction of, like the groups of power, I guess you could say, however you want to divide those up in our country. So like that is a very, very disturbing story, and it just really shows you it is a kind of very similar and an indication of the fact that similar things have probably been going on like ever since, the Iraq War. Like this is just how our military has always operated. And it's just why we need to, for example, end the wars right now and pull all of our presence out of the Middle East. And that includes defense contractors, the people hanging around with our implicit backing, which is something that I would be balled over in shock if Biden never did. I don't think he will. Anyway, Amazon, guys, they're in a little bit of a rough patch at the moment. It's the final stretch of their big union drive in Bessemer, Alabama. So solidarity in a big way. For all the rest of those workers there. Hopefully they are able to really get through. And dang, that's annoying. All right, I tried this article. I'm gonna use I'm trying to get it up on a Discourse and go back and forth. But it's paywalled, which is very unfortunate. I'm trying to get it, but I can't quite get it. But pretty much all you really need to know is the final stretch of the union drive, and Amazon in Bessemer, Alabama, the fulfillment center is voting on whether to recognize the union on Monday. That's when it goes, and the tech giant is really feeling the heat. They're going pretty crazy on Twitter. They got this guy Dave Clark, and it's not really going so well. On Wednesday, Senator Bernie Sanders, and this is pretty much the big thing. Bernie Sanders announced that he would be flying to Birmingham to meet with these workers. Employees of the trillion-dollar company are currently on the precipice of a historic vote that will determine whether or not they'll unionize, despite Amazon's repeated attempts to dissuade workers from doing so. But then, Amazon's corporate overlords responded to the senator's planned trip. Dave Clark, Amazon's senior vice president of worldwide operations, weighed in with the incredible quote, "I often say we are the Bernie Sanders of employers, but that's not quite right because we actually deliver a progressive workplace." Again, just the clear, psychotic thing to say. No one believes that's true. You're freaking out. You're literally the head of Amazon. Just, you don't need to call yourself the Bernie Sanders of progressive. You don't need to try that hard. What are you doing? If you want to hear about $15 an hour in healthcare, Senator Sanders will be speaking downtown. But if you would like to make at least $15 an hour and have good healthcare, Amazon is hiring. Yeah, have great healthcare. You're going to need it. You're going to need it. That's for sure. Unsurprisingly, Clark's attempts to school the Senate's resident champion for workers' rights backfired. First, Sanders confirmed his visit to plant. All I want to know is why the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos, is spending millions to prevent workers from organizing a union so they can negotiate for better wages, way damn more than $15 an hour, and way better benefits, time off, regulations on the influence Amazon has over their lives, the punitive punishment system, the high work standards that literally degrade their bodies, just awful stuff. So, yeah. And a big reason why Bezos is paying that minimum wage is because of Bernie Sanders, but we'll get to that. Here's what he said first. All I want to know is why the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos, is spending millions of dollars trying to prevent workers from organizing unions so they could negotiate for better wages, benefits, working conditions. Clark then replied with an accusation that Vermont's $11.75 minimum wage is lower than Amazon's $15 an hour. This argument is just completely stupid. First, Amazon implemented the minimum wage after pressure from supporters of the Stop Bezos Act, a piece of legislation introduced by Sanders specifically for that purpose in the massive pressure campaign that Bernie launched. And also, Bernie doesn't control the minimum wage in Vermont. He did, not everything he could, but he did try harder than anyone else in government to get this bill passed, the $15 minimum wage bill. The heated back and forth only continued to unfold when others got involved. Clark's Twitter mentions were and still are a mess, with users sharing article after article about Amazon's exploitive, disturbing working conditions. Hey, Dave Clark, remember that time you lied to millions of Americans about people dying of COVID-19 and Amazon, wrote one person. Fight for 15, a workers' rights organization, shared another link to a Guardian story about warehouse workers dying of reasons unrelated to COVID-19 prior to the pandemic, and employees have been alleging that they've watched co-workers die of heart attacks and by suicide, and then been instructed to get back to work as if nothing happened. Several people even called in a Fortune article about Clark that alleges he was nicknamed Sniper because he admitted to hiding in the shadows at Amazon's warehouses so he could find slackers he could fire. So that is the psychotic man operating this Twitter account. But what really took this Twitter war to new heights was responses claiming that workers are forced to pee in bottles and trash cans. The allegations have floated for a while, and many people have put it out that there's literally Amazon-made literature that says, if you don't take your urine bottle out of your Amazon truck when you leave at night, then you're going to get a formal write-up. Like that is a perfect example of why Amazon sucks in so many ways. A verified Amazon account called Amazon News responded to Pocan's statement. You really don't believe that peeing in bottles, do you? If that were true, no one would work for Amazon. But our representative, our boy, Mondaire Jones, put it best. If that were true, nobody would work for us. Imagine if our economy made it that easy. Exactly. Great point there, Mondaire. That's why we need unions. Exactly right. Great point. That's exactly why we need the Amazon labor unions formed. So shout out to Bamazon Union, baby, sending the best, absolute best to all the people in Bessemer. And on that note, we will see you for our 500th episode, which will be out. I don't know if we'll do it live yet, but we will. We will have a fantastic panel talking about some of the big issues. And it's gonna be a pretty lively, it's gonna be a pretty long conversation, and I think you're gonna like it. Until then, solidarity forever, and best of luck to all the people down there in Bessemer, Alabama. You're the hope of the labor world.